What if I told you that every prayer you've ever whispered, every temple you've entered, every sacred text you've revered, what if all of it was built on a magnificent illusion, a cosmic joke so profound that the moment you see through it, everything changes? Not because religion is false, but because it's far more interesting than you ever imagined. You see, there's a secret hiding in plain sight, something your priests never told you, something your scriptures carefully concealed behind layers of metaphor and mystery. And that secret is this: religion wasn't discovered, it was invented. Not by gods, not by prophets descending from mountains with stone tablets, but by human beings just like you, sitting around fires thousands of years ago, terrified of the darkness, desperate for meaning, and clever enough to create the most elaborate game of pretend the world has ever known. But here's where it gets fascinating. Here's where Alan Watts would lean forward with that mischievous smile and whisper something that would shake the foundations of everything you thought you knew. The invention wasn't a lie. It was a tool, a mirror, a trap set by consciousness to catch itself, to wake itself up from the dream it didn't even know it was dreaming. And you, right now, watching this, you're standing at the edge of that trap, about to fall through. Think about it for a moment. Really think about it. When did religion begin? Not the date, not the historical moment, but the psychological instant when the first human being looked up at the stars and felt something break inside them. That crushing awareness that they were small, temporary, vulnerable. That crushing awareness that they were going to die. And in that moment of existential terror, what did they do? They invented a story. They created gods in their own image, powerful, eternal, watching. They built heavens and hells, karma and reincarnation, salvation and damnation. They constructed elaborate mythologies to explain the inexplicable, to comfort the terrified animal inside their chest that suddenly realized it was mortal. But Watts understood something deeper. He understood that this wasn't just about fear of death. It was about something far more subtle, far more pervasive. It was about the fundamental illusion that sits at the core of human consciousness, the illusion of separation, the feeling that you are a separate self, trapped inside a bag of skin, isolated from the universe, alone in your own skull, desperately trying to connect with something larger than yourself. Religion was invented to bridge that gap, to create a pathway back to wholeness, to give you a set of rules, rituals, beliefs that would supposedly reunite you with the divine. But here's the trap. The beautiful cosmic trap that Watts spent his entire life trying to point out. You were never separated in the first place. The whole thing is a game of hide and seek that consciousness plays with itself. You are not in the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself through a temporary focal point of awareness. The divine didn't create you. You are the divine, pretending very convincingly to be someone named whatever your name happens to be, living in whatever year you think this is, watching a video about religion on a glowing rectangle. And religion? Religion is the elaborate set of clues left behind by previous versions of consciousness trying to wake up future versions. It's a message in a bottle thrown across centuries saying, "Hey, you're dreaming, wake up, remember what you really are." But the message got corrupted. It got institutionalized. It got weaponized. It got turned into control mechanisms and power structures and reasons to hate the other tribe that believed slightly different versions of the same fundamental story. The priests and the preachers and the gurus forgot the original point. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe some of them saw the truth and deliberately hid it, because a population that knows it's already divine, already complete, already connected to everything, that population is very difficult to control. Let's go deeper. Let's follow Watts down the rabbit hole he spent his life exploring. Imagine for a moment that you're back at the beginning, back with those first humans sitting around the fire. They've just developed language sophisticated enough to think about themselves thinking. They've just gained the terrible gift of self-awareness. And with that gift came suffering. Because now they could imagine the future, which meant they could imagine their own death. Now they could remember the past, which meant they could feel guilt, shame, regret. Now they could compare themselves to others, which meant they could feel inadequate, envious, separate. The psychological weight of consciousness became almost unbearable. So they invented religion as a pressure release valve, as a way to make sense of senseless suffering, as a way to feel like there was a plan, a purpose, a meaning behind the chaos. as a way to create community around shared beliefs, as a way to pass down wisdom and values and social cohesion from generation to generation. And it worked. Religion became the glue that held societies together. It became the framework through which humans understood morality, purpose, identity, belonging. It became so powerful that it shaped empires, launched crusades, inspired art and architecture and music that still moves us to tears centuries later. But Watts saw through the poetry to the mechanism underneath. He understood that every religion, at its core, is trying to solve the same problem. The problem of the ego. That voice in your head that narrates your life, that judges everything, that's constantly trying to protect you and improve you and make you special. The ego is the sense of being a separate, independent self navigating through a hostile or indifferent universe. And the ego is terrified. Terrified of death, terrified of meaninglessness, terrified of being nothing, nobody, nowhere. So it grasps. It clings to beliefs, identities, possessions, achievements. It builds a fortress of me and mine, us and them. And religion, in its institutional form, often just feeds that ego. It tells you that if you believe the right things, follow the right rules, join the right group, you'll be saved. You'll be special. You'll be chosen. You'll get to heaven or nirvana or enlightenment while those other people burn or suffer or remain ignorant. It's the ego using spirituality to reinforce itself. It's separation masquerading as unity. It's the disease pretending to be the cure. But every authentic religious tradition also contains within it the seeds of its own transcendence, hidden in the mystical branches of every faith, in Sufism, in Christian contemplation, in Zen Buddhism, in Advaita Vedanta, in Kabbalah. You find the same radical message, the message that Watts spent his life translating into language Western minds could hear, the message that there is no separate self, that the ego is an illusion, that you are not a stranger in the universe but an expression of it, that consciousness is not something you have but something you are, that the divine is not somewhere else, waiting to judge you, but right here, looking through your eyes, breathing through your lungs, thinking these very thoughts. This is why religion was invented, to eventually destroy itself, to serve as a ladder you climb and then kick away, to be training wheels on the bicycle of consciousness. The rituals, the prayers, the scriptures, the practices, they're all fingers pointing at the moon. And Watts would laugh that wonderful laugh of his and remind you, don't mistake the finger for the moon. Don't get so obsessed with the pointing that you never look at what's being pointed to. But we do. We build cathedrals to the finger. We start wars over whose finger is pointing correctly. We create elaborate theological systems analyzing every detail of the finger while completely ignoring the moon. We turn religion into an idol, the ultimate irony given that most religions explicitly warn against idolatry. We take the living, direct experience of reality that the mystics tried to communicate and we mummify it into doctrine. We take the wild, dangerous, transformative encounter with the infinite and we domesticate it into Sunday morning services and feel-good platitudes. We take the invitation to die before you die, to let go of everything you think you are, to dissolve into the vast mystery, and we turn it into a club you join to feel morally superior to your neighbors. And here's what's so beautiful and so frustrating about all of this. You can't think your way out of the trap. You can't intellectually understand your way to awakening, because the thing that's trying to understand is the very thing that needs to be seen through. The ego can't eliminate the ego. The self can't find the selfless state. The thinker can't think their way beyond thinking. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. It's like trying to touch the tip of your finger with that same fingertip. This is why all the great traditions ultimately point beyond belief, beyond doctrine, beyond theology, toward direct experience, toward meditation, contemplation, prayer that becomes silent witnessing, toward that moment when the voice in your head finally shuts up and you realize you're still here, still aware, still present, but without the narrator, without the judge, without the constant self-referential commentary. Just pure consciousness, awake to itself, not separate from anything, not clinging to anything, not running from anything. Just this, just now, just awareness being aware. And in that moment, religion reveals its true purpose. It was never about believing impossible things. It was never about earning your way into heaven. It was never about being good enough or pure enough or faithful enough. It was about this recognition, this remembering, this return to what you've always been but forgot somewhere along the way. Watts would tell you that the word religion comes from the Latin religare, which means to bind back, to reconnect. But reconnect to what? To God? Sure, if you want to use that word. But what if God isn't a being, but being itself? What if God isn't something separate from you, but the deepest nature of what you are? What if the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go when you die, but a state of consciousness available right now? What if salvation isn't about the future, but about seeing clearly in the present? Then religion stops being about belief and becomes about vision. It stops being about salvation and becomes about realization. It stops being about becoming something you're not and becomes about recognizing what you've always been. And suddenly all those ancient texts start to make sense in a completely different way. When Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you, he's not speaking metaphorically. When the Buddha talks about emptiness and no self, he's not being nihilistic. When the Upanishads declare, "Thou art that," they're not speaking poetry. They're pointing to a direct recognition available to anyone willing to look closely enough at the nature of their own consciousness. But this recognition is dangerous to those who profit from your ignorance. It's dangerous to institutions built on the premise that you need them to intercede between you and the divine. It's dangerous to anyone whose power depends on convincing you that you're broken, sinful, separate, in need of salvation that only they can provide. This is why the mystics were often persecuted by the very religions they belonged to. This is why Meister Eckhart was tried for heresy, why Al-Hallaj was executed, why Zen masters were considered dangerous, because they spoke the truth that undermines all religious authority. You don't need a middleman. You are the thing you've been seeking. Now, sit with that for a moment. Really let it land. You are the thing you've been seeking. Not potentially, not eventually, not if you do enough spiritual practice or accumulate enough good karma or believe strongly enough. Right now, already, the awareness reading these words, the consciousness experiencing this moment, that's it. That's what all the religions are trying to point toward with their different words and symbols and metaphors. That's what the mystics saw so clearly it drove them to ecstatic poetry and paradoxical utterances. That's what you are underneath the story of who you think you are. And religion was invented to help you remember this, but it got distorted along the way, because the human ego is incredibly clever at co-opting even the tools meant to transcend it. The ego turns enlightenment into an achievement. It turns surrender into a strategy. It turns presence into a practice you do to get somewhere better than here. It turns the pathless path into a highway with clearly marked exits and rest stops. It turns the living truth into dead words on a page. But every now and then, someone sees through the game. Someone wakes up from the dream within the dream. Someone realizes that they've been looking for their glasses while wearing them, searching for their face while looking in the mirror, seeking the seeker and missing the obvious. You're already home. You never left. The separation was always imaginary. The journey was always circular. The end was hidden in the beginning. And what happens when you see this? Does the world end? Do you become some enlightened being floating above human concerns? No. You remain exactly who you are, with your personality, your preferences, your quirks, and flaws. But the center of gravity shifts. The identification loosens. The grip relaxes. You start to experience life as play, rather than problem, as dance rather than duty, as art rather than arithmetic. You see through the seriousness without losing your humanity. You recognize the game without stopping playing. You hold your beliefs lightly, your identity loosely, your existence gracefully. You stop trying to get somewhere because you realize there's nowhere to get. You stop trying to become someone because you realize there's no one to become. You stop trying to achieve enlightenment because you realize that the one who wants to achieve enlightenment is the very obstacle to recognizing what's already enlightened. This is the final twist in the cosmic joke, the ultimate revelation that Alan Watts spent 50 years trying to communicate. Liberation isn't liberation from the world, but liberation into the world. It's not escape from the body, but embodiment of consciousness. It's not transcendence of humanity, but embrace of the full catastrophe of being human. The joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, birth and death, love and loss. Not as problems to be solved, but as the very texture of existence itself. The waves playing on the surface of the ocean that you are. So why was religion invented? It was invented because consciousness got lonely pretending to be separate. It invented religion as breadcrumbs back to itself. It invented churches and temples and mosques and monasteries as reminders that everyone else is consciousness pretending too. It invented rituals to puncture ordinary awareness, to create cracks where the light gets in. It invented sacred texts as maps for those who forgot they're already home. It invented teachers and traditions and practices as fingers pointing at the moon of your own nature. And then it promptly forgot all of this and turned religion into exactly the opposite of what it was meant to be. Turned freedom into bondage, turned presence into postponement, turned recognition into seeking, turned home into a distant destination. But the original impulse remains. Hidden beneath the institutional decay and theological arguments and religious warfare, the original invitation still whispers, "Wake up, remember, come home to what you've always been." Not through belief, but through seeing. Not through faith, but through recognition. Not through becoming, but through being. And you don't need permission from any priest or guru or institution. You don't need to wait until you're good enough, pure enough, enlightened enough. The recognition is available right now because it's not something that happens to you. It's the recognition of what's already happening as you. The awareness that's aware of these words is the same awareness that looks through every pair of eyes that has ever existed or will ever exist. It's the one consciousness playing all the parts in the cosmic drama, simultaneously hiding from itself and seeking itself, creating elaborate games of separation so it can experience the joy of reunion. This is what Alan Watts saw with such clarity it radiated from every word he spoke. This is what he spent his life trying to communicate in books and lectures and conversations, knowing full well that words can only point, never capture. Knowing that the moment you say, "This is it," the mind immediately creates, "That isn't it." Knowing that any description of awakening becomes another concept to cling to, another achievement for the ego to pursue. But still he pointed, with humor and grace and infectious enthusiasm. Still he tried to wake people up from the trance of separation. Still he deconstructed the religious structures while honoring the mystical core they protected. Still he laughed at the absurdity of it all. The fact that infinite consciousness is right now reading these words, having somehow convinced itself it's a limited individual, trapped in time, seeking something it already is, worried about problems that only exist in thought. The cosmic joke is that there's no one to get the joke, because the getting of the joke is the dissolution of the one who would get it. And here we are, at the end that isn't an end, at the conclusion that concludes nothing, at the answer that dissolves the question. Religion was invented so you would eventually see that you don't need religion. The search was begun so you would eventually realize there's nothing to search for. The spiritual path was laid out so you could discover there's nowhere to go. Every practice, every belief, every tradition, they're all just different flavors of the same medicine designed to cure the disease of separation that was never actually real. And when the medicine does its work, when the recognition happens, when the membrane between self and other becomes transparent, you don't reject religion. You don't become an atheist crusader or a spiritual cynic. You simply see through it to what it was always pointing toward. You appreciate the scaffolding while no longer needing it. You honor the finger while gazing at the moon. You respect the map while walking the territory. You understand that for those still dreaming the dream of separation, religion serves a purpose. But for those waking up, religion becomes transparent, revealing the simple truth it was always protecting. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through this particular perspective, playing this particular role in the infinite game of hide and seek that existence plays with itself. So what now? How do you live with this recognition? You don't live differently. You live the same life with different eyes. You still eat breakfast and pay bills and love people and feel sadness and laugh at jokes. But the weight lifts, the urgency relaxes, the grasping loosens. You participate fully in the play of existence without being fooled that the play is all there is. You engage completely with the drama while recognizing you're the awareness in which the drama appears. You take your life seriously without taking yourself seriously. You become, in Watts's beautiful phrase, like water flowing downhill. You follow your nature effortlessly, adapting to circumstances without losing your essence, powerful without forcing, graceful without trying. And sometimes you might find yourself drawn back to religion. not as a believer but as a player who knows the game. You might sit in meditation at a Zen monastery or chant in a Hindu temple or contemplate in a Christian chapel, not seeking salvation but celebrating the creativity of consciousness in inventing so many beautiful forms to point toward the formless. Or you might never enter a religious building again, because you've realized that every moment is already sacred, every place is already holy, every encounter is already communion. The form doesn't matter once you've seen the essence. If this resonates somewhere deep inside you, if something in these words touched a recognition you can't quite name, then do something for me, for yourself really. Press that like button not as a mechanical gesture but as a declaration that you're willing to question everything you've been taught about who you are. Drop a comment sharing your own moment of recognition, your own glimpse behind the curtain, your own experience of the cosmic joke, and share this with someone who's still seeking, still struggling, still trapped in the beautiful prison of believing they're separate from the wholeness they're seeking. Subscribe to continue this conversation, to explore together the spaces between the words where the real transmission happens. Because what we're doing here isn't just sharing information. We're engaging in the ancient art of consciousness, waking itself up through human exchange, through the alchemy of words pointing beyond themselves, through the recognition that happens when one apparent self reminds another apparent self that neither of them exists the way they think they do. We're participating in the game religion was invented to facilitate, the game of consciousness pretending to be separate so it can experience the ecstasy of remembering its unity. And you, watching this right now, you're not a passive observer. You're an essential player in the unfolding of the mystery. Your awakening isn't just for you. It's the universe awakening to itself through the particular configuration of awareness you call yourself. So, welcome home. Welcome to the recognition that's been waiting here all along. Patient as eternity, obvious as this moment, clear as the awareness reading these final words.